You've heard me talk about Monopoly Party so many times on this channel, but have you heard me talk about Monopoly Mezase Daifugo Jinsei, which is an October 2002 Monopoly game developed by Runecraft, the same developer as a bunch of other board game-inspired games, as well as a bunch of early 2000s licensed franchise games, and was published by Infogrames. This game initially released in North America on the original Xbox, with the PS2 and GameCube versions coming like within a month, but then the release history gets super weird. So the original Xbox version that was released in Europe 1 month after the game's initial release, but then Japan never got the original Xbox version. The PlayStation 2 version released in Europe 2 months after the initial release, but then Europe also got the GameCube version 2 months after that. But then Japan got both this version and its GameCube version several months later in July 2003. It was still about a year under the initial release, but still took a really, really long time. And I love this game. Obviously not the Japanese version, but I love Monopoly Party. As far as I can tell, it is the best and the most replayable version of Monopoly because it has this super eccentric party mode where everybody rolls at the same time. There's kind of like a weird hierarchy as to what happens in that case, but it's also the most accurate availability of house rules, which says a lot for a game that was released in 2002. You can probably notice that the marketing for the Japanese releases is a little different than the North American release, which is maybe why it took so long to come over here, but nonetheless, I now have both Japanese versions, and that's super cool. So this game also isn't expensive at all, so if you like Monopoly, strongly, strongly recommend going to pick up this GameCube version. The original Super Mario Bros. 3 released in Japan in October 1988 on the Famicom, with its North American NES release coming in February 1990, obviously being developed and published by Nintendo, and this might be my favorite game of all time. Maybe not this specific release. 1 second. So of course this game needs no introduction, but I will make note that this game is where Mario games reconverged after the debacle of Super Mario Bros. 2 being different in Japan and North America, resulting in the infamous Super Mario USA in Japan. It also contains several game updates, having an overworld, having sortable power-ups, so all in all, a better version of Mario 1. However, in the early 2000s, to go along with the release of the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo made an effort to bring many of its famous NES and Super Nintendo games to the system, since the GBA could run them, with different releases like the classic NES series, the Famicom mini-series in Japan, and some other ports like the 3 Donkey Kong Country games, the first 2 Mother games in Japan, and of course, all the original Mario games, including this specific release of Super Mario 3, Super Mario Advance 4, Super Mario 3, and Mario Bros. Yes, we have a weird numbering scheme for the Super Mario games on GBA. So this specific release came into Japan first in July 2003, but North America didn't have to wait long, getting it only 3 months later in October 2003. And my dad and I played Super Mario Bros. On the classic NES series and the Super Mario Bros. 3 port on GBA. We played it together since he played them growing up, and him and my mom were picking up games for me to have on my Game Boy Advance growing up. He picked this one up along with Super Mario Bros. 1, so I have very, very fond memories of playing this game, at least in English, with him. He knew all the hidden mushrooms, he knew all the star powers, so Dad, you always got me out of a tight spot, and this one's for you. As someone who knows nothing about Fire Emblem, let's talk about Fire Emblem Akatsuki no Megami, or Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn, here in North America. So Fire Emblem, if you're unfamiliar, is Nintendo's very famous and very popular tactical JRPG series, starting with the initial Famicom release in April 1990 and growing into the multi-Switch game release it is today. This game, obviously developed and published by Nintendo, initially released in Japan in February 2007, and took 9 months to come over to North America in November 2007. The game is both a sequel plot-wise and gameplay-wise to the GameCube's Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, so even though I can't say much about the plot of this game without going way past 3 minutes short, I will note that there is save data compatibility between the GameCube game and the Wii game, so if you're able to save your GameCube save file to a memory card and put it in the Wii, there is some sort of compatibility there, which is pretty cool. I'm not sure if this is necessarily one of the first few games to do this, or first few games to do this between GameCube and Wii, whatever it is. It's certainly very neat, and it's certainly very, very Nintendo. So if you're a fan of Fire Emblem, you don't need me to tell you about this game, but if you don't know anything about Fire Emblem, just know that this game sold very well, and if you like tactical RPGs, go get into the series and enjoy me putting this game in my mouth. Elevator Action initially released in Japanese and North American arcades in 1983, being developed by Pacific Kojiu, I think I said that right, who also made another certain very famous arcade game called Space Invaders, and published by the also famous Taito, where you play as a secret agent who has to descend 30 floors, with your view kind of being like a dollhouse where you're seeing the floors from the side and there's no wall, and you're trying to collect documents from specific rooms, platforming / shooting your way through to eventually get to an escape car at the bottom of the house or the building. The game was ported to the Famicom 2 years after the initial release in June 1985, with a North American NES release coming shortly thereafter in August 1985, and this game was extremely popular. It got ports to several Japanese home computers. It got a Game Boy port in both Japan and North America in 1991. It had a sequel in 1994, and also Hamster Arcade Archives re-released the game on PS4 in 2017 and Switch in 2019 across all regions. This specific release also had some Virtual Console re-releases, including the Wii Virtual Console in North America and Japan in 2007, and the Japanese exclusive Wii U and 3DS Virtual Console releases in 2014. Elevators. So a little bonus here, while I was cataloging the games that I did shorts for, I came across that I actually have the original Game Boy port of Elevator Action in Japanese. I was going to talk about this game at some point, but I'm just gonna tack it on here. So, Wario Land Advance Yoki no Otakara, or Wario Land 4, is an August 2001 platformer in the, you guessed it, Wario Land series, which is an offshoot of the Super Mario Bros. Series where you play as, you also guessed it, Wario. So developed and published by Nintendo. This is technically the fourth game in the Wario Land series, with the first one technically being Super Mario Land 3 on the original Game Boy, the second and third entries coming on the Game Boy Color. And this series is functionally different from the Super Mario Bros. Series, where instead of having individual levels in 8 different overworlds, you play through 4 different passages, with the only way to completion being finding all the jewels in the passage and beating that passage's boss. Wario is a pretty interesting character overall. You probably don't need me to tell you that, but he goes on this quest after reading of a mysterious pyramid, a mysterious princess, and even though you do indeed save the princess after completing the game, you can get one of 4 endings based on how well you've completed those passages, and you're more interested in the treasure in the pyramid anyway, so not surprising. This game was received very well, with many reviews that Wikipedia cites crediting the graphics, and it was obviously popular enough to get a handful of re-releases, including on the 3DS Virtual Console in 2011, the Wii U Virtual Console in 2014, and Switch Online just this past February. It was the last Wario Land game on a handheld console, but we did get Wario Land Shake It on the Wii in 2008, and Wario has mostly settled into his microgame series otherwise, but it's still really neat to add a famous Wario piece to the collection. Yoshi no Banyo Inryoku, or Yoshi Topsy Turvy, is a December 2004 Yoshi platformer, but with a twist. Literally, you might notice that the game is a little bit bigger than a normal Game Boy Advance cartridge, and that's because this game has a built-in sensor that can affect gameplay. So developed by Artoon, who also worked on games like Panobi, Blinks the Time Sweeper and its sequel, Yoshi's Island DS, and of course, Fling Smash, and published by Nintendo, you have to use a tilt control at various points to affect Yoshi's surroundings, whether it be to cause some mayhem with the enemies or to turn hurdles into passages. So, of course, it's very inventive, but the game was not received well due to its gameplay overall, and a lot of critics referenced how WarioWare Twisted, I think it was, did it better. Speaking of, Nintendo is very much known for its, at times, very wild innovation, and this isn't even the first game to use a built-in tilt sensor in a handheld game. So the aforementioned WarioWare game, there's that one, but there was also Kirby Tilt and Tumble on the Game Boy Color, so like this capability goes back a little far. The game would pit stop in Europe 4 months after release, with a North American release coming 2 months after that in June 2005, and that's likely where the game is going to stay until Nintendo finds a way to put it on Switch Online. So, neat piece of Game Boy hardware here. Am I tilting it yet? Tales of the Abyss released initially in December 2005. Hold on. And it's the 12th main entry in the JRPG Tales series, being developed and published by Namco, originally for the PlayStation 2, which then came to North America almost a full year later in October 2006. Regardless, the game was ported to 3DS in June 2011 in Japan, with a North America release again taking a little while to come over later on Valentine's Day 2012. So if you're not familiar, Tales is a huge series of games, and this action RPG is no different. All the main RPG elements are there, but Wikipedia notes some recurring themes such as grading after battles, a cooking system, both of which are pretty self-explanatory, but also like task-based titles that your character can receive. Sure, the 3DS title doesn't change a whole lot gameplay-wise, but it does utilize the dual screen, the 3D capabilities, and it creates an overall improved experience, so that's pretty cool. Story-wise, not gonna lie, I was pretty confused reading through it, and you probably don't need me to tell you about it if you know about Tales, but the original game was received quite well, with this specific game even getting a manga and an anime, but the 3DS version, this one, was not received as well. Still pretty decent, but like, not as well, mostly because of what wasn't changed as opposed to the things that were changed. We're going to talk about Kinnikuman Nisei Shinsendai Chojin versus Densetsu Chojin, but let me start by talking about Kinnikuman in general first. So Kinnikuman started as a manga series in 1979 as a parody to the then ultra-popular and still pretty popular Ultraman series, and this series is about a superhero participating in a wrestling tournament for the sake of his planet, but the sequel to that series is called Kinnikuman Second Generation, and that specific series came to North America brand-wise as Ultimate Muscle. So Ultimate Muscle is one of those series that I remember seeing on Cartoon Network as a kid, but I don't retain much info about it aside from being on one advertisement on a Yu-Gi-Oh! VHS tape I had growing up. So that's Ultimate Muscle. Let's talk about this game. So this game is a November 2002 fighting/wrestling game based in the Ultimate Muscle universe. Surprise, surprise. And it actually did come to North America 7 months later in June 2003 as Ultimate Muscle Legends vs. New Generation. So developed by AKI Corp and published by Bandai. If you notice the Bandai, the best variant up here, that's pretty cool. I believe it is the first game in this series to come to North America under this specific branding, but I know it's not the first game in the overall franchise to come. I don't know if Kinnikuman Second Generation was out by then, but we did get MUSLE on NES, which is like rebranding of a muscle game from Japan at the time. So that's kind of neat. But yeah, this did come to North America, which is kind of surprising. There isn't a ton of info about this game otherwise, but it did spark 2 expansions, one on PS2 in 2004, another on PSP in 2006, both of which are unsurprisingly stuck in Japan. And aside from another GBA game, no other games have come to North America. But even then, there have been no games in the series since 2008. So I don't know if the entire franchise is dormant, just the games are dormant, but weird piece of Japanese media to now be in my collection. So that's pretty cool. Panel Dippon on Super Famicom and Dr. Mario and Panel Dippon on GBA, or Tetris Attack and Dr. Mario / Puzzle League here in North America respectively, are 2 puzzle games part of the Panel Dippon series, which is a mostly suffocated series that never gained traction here in North America, maybe because of its Tetris and Mario branding for the original game, Tetris Attack in North America, but the game is super different from Tetris and the original Japanese release, so you mix up the gameplay, you mix up the branding, and it didn't really have a chance to succeed here, or at least gain traction. And the rabbit hole for these games is huge. Like, it was stressing me out going through these games, but I did find, thankfully, a really, really excellent retrospective by John Cartwright, who is formerly of Nintendo Life, So if you're interested in hearing way better detail than me talking about them, go watch that video. I'll see if I can put a link in the description. But otherwise, check out this super cool Japanese Xbox 360 game I got. Armored Core 4 Platinum Collection. I don't own an Xbox 360 anymore. I can't hit a lot. Dragon Tale is a December 1990 puzzle platformer that came to North America a little over a year later in April 1992 as Nail and Scale, and it has no relation to the animated series from the early 2000s. Originally developed and published by IMAX, I am indeed Max. It's the same developer as a handful of Japanese tabletop games and train simulators, so that's a combo. But you play as a guy named Spike as you try to scale up platforms using a climbing nail, which I think is also called a spike, that you can also use to throw at people, so that's kind of fun. But let me tell you, I was thrown off by this gameplay. When I saw Dragon Tale, I thought nail and scale like the nails and scales of a dragon, and boy was I wrong. You platform through 51 levels and 5 bosses to get to the final boss, who is a dragon, but it's not dragon nails and dragon scales, and that I was totally shocked. That's not what I thought I bought. At the very least, you can restart from where you last left off if you game over, so that's cool. But otherwise, this is an odd little duck. An odd little duck. Quack, quack. Murder on the Mississippi released for the Commodore 64 here in North America in May 1986, being developed and published by Activision. Loosely based on a novel by, I think, pretty famous Agatha Christie, you are tasked with solving a murder mystery on board a cruise ship, probably on the Mississippi, and even though it wasn't the best game, it was good enough for the time, and it helped move adventure games from keyboard-based to regular controller-based, so to speak. It was considered quite difficult, but the publisher Jaleco licensed the game for a Famicom release on October 1986 as Mississippi Satsuden Jiken, and that was a mistake. This game is now considered a legendary bad game in Japan, whether it be for Japan just exposing the flaws of the original game or it was poor work being brought over, but overall the complaints past that are that it's too particular, it's too unforgiving, or just in general it doesn't match the gameplay type or the themes of the Famicom's younger audience. So this is a bad game, apparently. It doesn't taste though. Meitante Holmes Karen no Chosenjo is a May 1989 detective adventure developed by Another as the third and final game in the publisher Towachiki's home series, all of which were released exclusively on the original Famicom in the late 1980s. And as it sounds, you control the iconic Sherlock Holmes and John Watson duo, traveling through much of Europe, investigating people, places, and things. That's not a lot of info, but it's cool that it's the third in a series of Sherlock Holmes games, and the publisher is also responsible for a Garfield game, if that counts for anything. Red and green. Do I look like Christmas? Well, hopefully I do, because I got a lot to talk about. So, first of all, the Wonder Swan was Bandai's late 90s handheld response to Nintendo's Game Boy line. And even though the system has been held to relative obscurity and is only of any real interest to Japanese game collectors, it does have historical context as being the last project that Gunpei Yokoi worked on. It was the same person that helped Nintendo rise to prominence, as well as being the person widely credited with designing the original Game Boy. Now, Romancing Saga is a series of sci-fi RPGs by the original Squaresoft, who would go on to become part of Square Enix, and it started on the original Game Boy and moved through most popular systems from that age on, including a 1992 Super Famicom release that was the first to have the Saga branding, as opposed to the first 3 games that had Final Fantasy branding. Now, that Super Famicom release would be ported to the Wonder Swan Color, which was just a system upgrade for the original Wonder Swan, and it's as RPG as an RPG can be. It features a traveling team of 8 people, turn-based battles, though without experience points, and a mostly open world to explore. The story is way too much for me to go into in a short for a game that I will literally never play, but essentially the gods are at hand, and you and your party have to search for the stones that imprisoned one of the gods. probably for being naughty naughty. So perhaps not this specific version, but this game in general laid the groundwork for basically every Saga game in the future, included being ported and remade several times, like this one is itself. There's also a PS2 game and several virtual console ports. So Romancing Saga is a big deal. It may only ever be loved by the handful who come across it, but it's still cool to add a WonderSwan color game to the collection. Doesn't taste anything like a Switch cartridge. Marmalade Boy started as a manga series in 1992, and to say that the plot is twisted, I will summarize what Wikipedia has to say. Mickey is a sophomore in high school, and her parents sit her down to tell her that they're getting a divorce and swapping partners with another couple. She kind of agrees after meeting the other family and their son, and her and the son start to get close, and she falls in love with him, becoming best friends. But they enter the throes of friendship when outside forces get in the way, like past boyfriends and girlfriends. Jesus Christ. Anyway, like so many other Japanese media franchises we've talked about, this series got an anime, live-action series, novel series, and of course, a video game adaptation. Originally releasing on the original Game Boy, then this Super Famicom release in April 1995. It's a dating sim involving the other family's boy and two other boys, where you play as Mickey. I don't need to say more. It seems like the series went pretty dormant until 2013 when there was another manga run. Why? Gary Kitchen is a famous game developer who got started in the 80s, most notably porting the original Donkey Kong to the Atari 2600 and being part of a group of early developers for Activision, along with his brother Dan, who I've actually met before, and David Crane, who is also pretty famous in the early video game stratosphere. So as CEO of Absolute Entertainment, him and David Crane published quite a few recognizable games between 1986 and 1995, including Gary Kitchen's Battle Tank on the original NES, which then got a sequel on the Super Nintendo in June 1992, first releasing in North America as Gary Kitchen's Super Battle Tank War in the Gulf, then releasing in Japan 10 months later, even after Europe, simply as Super Battle Tank in April 1993. There's not a ton to say about this game aside from it being a tank/war sim, but I think the context surrounding the game is way more interesting, especially because I met Dan Kitchen. It did get a Genesis port only in North America also in 1992, and it was also ported to the Game Gear in 2001, which makes it the last game officially published for the system, so that's pretty neat. Definitely go check out Absolute Entertainment, Gary and Dan Kitchen, and David Crane, because there's a lot of history to be had there. I came across two back-to-back Persona games, one of which is the PSP port of the very original game, but when I was researching, I realized I didn't know what the I was talking about. So instead, I want to talk about a completely different game, Lucky Monkey on Game Boy. I thought this game had some very serious lore behind it, but not at all. You play as Spanky the monkey in a 2D platformer who has the ability to spawn bubbles. Basically, you can charge up these bubbles to release different sizes of sport balls. So like a small charge would be a baseball, large charge would be a basketball, and you throw them, shoot them at these fruit-shaped enemies to stun them and subsequently beat them. And you do this for like 50 levels, 5 bosses, only to then take on the witch Morticia, who puts you into the tower that you are playing through. Isn't Morticia also an Addams Family character? Is there any resemblance there? I don't know. The game released on the original Game Boy in Japan in April 1991, but the game took well over a year to come to North America in July 1992 as Spanky's Quest. There was also a Super Nintendo version that was more reliant on collecting keys to unlock the next level. That released in Japan between April 1991 and July 1992. The intermittent, but the Super Nintendo version came over at the same time as the English version of the original Game Boy game. The game was developed and published by Natsume, the same company responsible for the original Harvest Moon series. So, like, that's pretty cool, but also monkeys. That's my monkey noise. Shinsenden is a December 1989 JRPG developed by Tamtex and published by IREM, whose whole thing is being set in Chinese Japanese and otherwise Eastern folklore. Apparently the Shinsenden is a book in the Taoism religion / culture, forgive me, that originated in China like 2,300 years ago, but spread to other countries and is still being studied today, so that's pretty neat. The story to this game is about a monk and his partner who discover an injured time traveler, and then the partner eventually gets taken, and then you need to save her. Pretty basic, I think. But that's literally all I could find about the game, besides it being basically an early Dragon Quest clone. But it's still cool to see a game that was so rooted in religion and religious settings, since that kind of thing would never have gone off the ground here in North America. But yeah, neat little piece of Famicom history, I guess. Gegege no Kitaro is a Japanese media franchise formerly beginning with a manga in 1960, but with roots as kamishibai as early as the 1930s that grew into an anime, films, and of course, video games. The series is based around a boy who is part of the defunct ghost tribe as he interacts with spirits that we, in North America, know best as yokai. So you're trying to unite the human world with the yokai world while also defeating monsters from other cultures, for example, Dracula from Transylvania, all while being very interwoven with other parts of Japanese culture. Gegege no Kitaro Yokai Sozoju Arawaru is one of the earlier games in the series, releasing in December 1996 and being developed by Act Japan, who has a very small catalog with licensed games like this one and being published by Bandai. The game is basically Pokemon, where the entire gameplay revolves around capturing and battling with yokai, I am pretty sure. So this is a really cool piece of gaming history to see what tried the Pokemon formula before Pokemon exploded. I've seen this boy character at some point in the past, but I have no idea where. And even though there were a handful of other releases in the series, none of which were released recently, there was an anime that ended right around the start of the pandemic, and there was also a movie releasing in 2023, so kind of an interesting guy here. Ushio Totora is a Japanese media franchise beginning with, you guessed it, a manga series from 1990 to 1996 about a boy who accidentally discovers a mythical tiger spirit sealed in his parents' basement. The parents are temple keepers, of course, and you set the tiger spirit free in the name of battling other demonic and malicious characters. You quest together to save the world, but there's also some Pinocchio-like figure at play. I think he might actually be Pinocchio, and you're reluctant companions with each other, with Mr. Tiger Spirit learning right from wrong in the process, which is pretty odd, but you can't fault them for being unique. The series, of course, grew into an anime, but lay dormant for like 20-something years before getting a TV series in like 2015. And then, of course, a theater play in 2022. So, like, that's pretty cool. It's a little different. We're here to talk about games, of course, and it's kind of funny because there are two games in this very short series, with the Super Famicom game, this one, releasing before a completely different Famicom game. So that's a little backwards. This game released in January 1993, where you travel across Japan playing as either Ushio or Tora with different abilities in this 2D platformer. The game actually looks really, really good for a random game on the Super Famicom, and I wish I could say it's the developer Yutaka, but nothing super stuck out to me except games and franchises like Gundam, Kinnikuman, and Kamen Rider. So, like, I don't know, this is a weird one. Roar! You know we love baseball on this channel, and here we have Softball Tengoku, initially releasing in Japan in October 1989, but you might know it better by its North American title, Dusty Diamonds All-Star Softball, which came to North America 9 months later in July 1990. So developed by the channel frequent TOSE, this game is actually kind of fun. So similar to future backyard sports, backyard baseball games, you choose your team from a cast of 60 fictional players, each with their own quirks. I don't know if it was the first game to do that or just an early game to do that, but like, still pretty cool for laying that groundwork. And basically, you can play a whole season in an attempt to win a championship, playing either fast pitch or slow pitch softball, which is pretty cool because we have not had a lot of that in gaming history, but like, it literally just sounds like an early backyard baseball game. This game is pretty expensive on NES, and I don't know, it's super cool. It sounds super cool, it looks super cool, and it's definitely a game that I should play sooner than later, but you know. This series needs no introduction, but Super Monkey Ball is a wonderful and funny platforming game that began as an arcade cabinet called Monkey Ball in 2001, but came to the GameCube very quickly just 3 months later in September 2001. The game is developed by Amusement Vision, who is a very Sega studio that also worked on some Virtua games, F-Zero GX, the first Yakuza game, and speaking of Sega, this is a Sega game on a Nintendo console. What? Well, it just so happens that this is the first Sega-published game to release on a Nintendo system, effectively ending the console wars between Nintendo and Sega after the failure and discontinuation of the Sega Dreamcast. The game, if you're somehow not familiar, is this adorable platformer where you are a monkey in a ball. Get it? Where you navigate twists and turns, collecting bananas in an arcade-like fashion, with extra points given to those who finish the level faster and collect more bananas. Aside from the main story, there's also a party mode, a minigame mode, but all in all, this game definitely got eyes on this awesome series. The series is still getting releases today, so what are you waiting for? Go play it. Cross-Ange Rondo of Angels and Dragons is a mecha manga / anime series, both of which started in the back half of 2014 about a girl who was part of what would be considered the upper class, but on her 16th birthday, her brother basically exposes her as not part of the upper class because she cannot use the upper class mana. That gets her banished to the lower class. She becomes a soldier, and the series follows her trials and tribulations in mech combat fashion. So, nice. Cross-Ange Tenshi Torio no Rando TR is a sort of prequel action shooter about the character Naomi, who in the series canonically dies before that aforementioned girl gets banished. You have sections of story, sections of customization, sections of action. So it sounds pretty fleshed out for a one-off game for a relatively one-off franchise, but it was apparently good enough to be published by Bandai Namco after being developed by Shade, who it looks like has a penchant for games like this, but maybe I just don't know any better. I feel like I've heard of Shade before this, but regardless, it's still a pretty neat piece to add to a collection that doesn't actually have a PS Vita in it. Ninja-kun Majo no Boken initially released in Japanese arcades in October 1984, with this Famicom version coming 7 months later in May 1985, being developed by TOSE and published by Jalico Entertainment. It's a vertical platformer that repeats levels, but each time the level repeats, the difficulty gets increased, more enemies spawn, and your goal is to defeat those enemies by jumping on them or by throwing shurikens at them, all to move on to the next level, along with the occasional bonus stage unlocked via items. The game would be ported to home computers over the following years, but the game also got a revival on PS4 and Switch via the Arcade Archive series all over the world. The PS4 version came out in 2014, and the Switch version came out in 2018. I also wasn't super familiar with this series beforehand, but this game is apparently the first in the Ninja Jajamaru-kun series or Ninja Kid series that is still actually getting releases today, as recently as a retro collection in 2023 on Switch and PS4. Gift Pia is an April 2003 Japanese exclusive JRPG developed by Skip and published by none other than Nintendo. Skip is best known for the Chibi Robo series, but this game was also planned to release in North America and Europe, but ended up getting canceled in both regions. Come back to that in a second. The game is centered around a boy named Pakul who oversleeps a ceremony for him and must pay his debt back, initially with tons of restrictions, one of which is face pixelation and overall slow progress, but as you gain rapport with the town, those restrictions start to lift and you get access to more efficient ways of paying that debt back. It kind of reminds me of Tulip, which is another cursed release game. Speaking of curse, Skip, who again also did Chibi Robo, did not sell well. Skip might just be cursed, as this game did not receive well initially, so despite this game seeming super interesting, it does not have any re-releases. So if you want to play this, either you need to find an English patch or learn Japanese. I guess it's a shame, but it is really cool to add this piece of Nintendo history to the collection. For the 50th short in this series, I want to talk about Pac-Man Collection, which is a July 2001 Pac-Man compilation developed by Mass Media and published by, of course, Namco, initially releasing in North America, then in Europe in December 2001, and then finally in Japan in January 2002. Mass Media has done a ton of Pac-Man games, but also a couple other oddities like a Muppets game, the Bible game, Ratchet and Clank ports on the European PS Vita, and most importantly, Carnival games. This game holds a really special place in my heart as a game I had in English, of course, and played a ton growing up on Game Boy Advance, even though it's literally just Pac-Man in a bunch of different ways, including the original arcade Pac-Man, the isometric Pac-Mania, which I always thought was pretty cool, the Tetris-like Pac-Attack, completely different gameplay style, and Pac-Man Arrangement, which was just a bunch of different reskins of the original arcade Pac-Man, but like in subsequent nature, so like that's pretty cool. I absolutely love this little guy, and I would strongly recommend picking it up if you like Pac-Man at all, considering that the game is ridiculously cheap and you could easily get a solid few hours of just plain Pac-Man gameplay. So there he is.